It is 3 a.m. The house is completely still, and your eyes snap open. Again. Not because of a noise, not because of a dream, just that sudden, wide-awake feeling, like something inside you pulled the switch. You lie there staring at the ceiling. You turn over. You fluff the pillow. Maybe you check the clock, which only makes it worse. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a familiar thought creeps in. Why does this keep happening to me? Your doctor probably told you it's just aging. Your friends say the same thing. And so you've accepted it. A bad night's sleep, part of getting older. But I want to tell you something important today, something I tell my patients when they sit across from me in clinic. This is not a sleep problem. This is a brain health problem. And there is a process happening inside your brain right now, during every one of these awakenings, that most doctors never mention. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what it is, and you will have a concrete plan to stop it. Most people think of sleep as rest, a passive state, your body lying still while the hours pass. But your brain is not resting, not even close. The moment you fall into deep sleep, your brain shifts into its most important work cycle of the entire day. And I mean that literally. There is a biological system inside your skull, discovered only in the last decade or so, that neuroscientists now believe may be one of the most critical processes for long-term brain health we have ever found. Think of it like a night shift cleaning crew. During the day, your brain works constantly. It processes information, fires signals, manages your body, handles your emotions. And like any hard-working system, it produces waste. Toxic proteins accumulate in the spaces between your neurons. The same proteins we see build up in the brains of people with dementia. Your brain cannot clean itself while it is running, so it waits for deep sleep. And when that cleaning system gets interrupted, night after night, the waste starts to accumulate faster than it can be cleared. Now think about what happens when you wake up at 3 a.m. Imagine a long electrical cord plugged into a wall. At the end of that cord is a lamp. If you pull the plug halfway out, the lamp starts to flicker. The power is still there, but the connection is broken. That is exactly what a nighttime awakening does to your glymphatic system. It cuts the cleaning crew's shift short. The channels narrow again. The fluid stops flowing. And the waste, the toxic proteins that were in the process of being cleared, stays behind. One awakening does limited damage, but night after night, week after week, month after month of fragmented sleep means that cleaning crew never gets to finish the job, and the trash starts to pile up. Now here is the part I need you to understand, because this is where the story gets more complicated. Your cortisol, a hormone that should be at its absolute lowest point between midnight and 4 a.m., is not behaving the way it should. In people who wake regularly in the early morning hours, this hormone is doing something very specific at the wrong time. And the reason it is doing that is not simply stress. There is a precise biological mechanism behind it. And that mechanism is what we need to talk about next. I want to tell you about a woman I saw in my neurology clinic not long ago. She was in her late 60s, sharp, engaged, the kind of person who reads widely and stays curious about the world. She came in because her family had noticed she was repeating herself, misplacing things more than usual, taking longer to find words in conversation. She was convinced it was just aging. She had accepted it. But when we talked about her sleep, something caught my attention. She was getting roughly 7 hours a night. On paper, that sounds adequate. But she was waking 2, sometimes 3 times between 2 and 4 a.m. Had been for years. And she had never connected those two things, the broken nights and the fading sharpness, because no one had ever explained to her that they could be connected. Here is what I want you to hear clearly. Sleeping 7 hours, but waking 4 times, is not the same as sleeping 7 unbroken hours. Your brain knows the difference, even if you don't feel it yet. Let me explain what happens at the cellular level when sleep is fragmented over time. Researchers studying brain tissue have found that people with more disrupted sleep show measurable damage to a specific type of cell called a pericyte. These are specialized cells that wrap around the tiny blood vessels feeding your brain. They act like gatekeepers, regulating blood flow and controlling what crosses into brain tissue. When pericytes are damaged, blood flow to the brain becomes less stable. The brain's ability to clear waste and receive nutrients is compromised. And this damage is not theoretical. It shows up in brain tissue that can be examined directly. There is also the matter of slow-wave sleep itself. As I explained in the last section, the glymphatic system depends on deep sleep to do its work. But here is something important. Slow-wave sleep naturally decreases with age. Even without fragmentation, the amount of N3 sleep you get in your 60s and 70s is less than what you had in your 40s. Every awakening cuts into what little you have left. It is like trying to fill a glass with a slow drip, and someone keeps knocking it over before it is full. Research has found that people with greater sleep fragmentation experience faster cognitive decline in the decade before a dementia diagnosis. And this relationship holds even when researchers account for total sleep time. The continuity of sleep, not just the quantity, appears to matter independently. Now, I want to be honest with you the way I am honest with my patients. We cannot yet say with certainty that fragmented sleep causes dementia. The relationship is bidirectional and complex. Early neurodegeneration can itself disrupt sleep, which then accelerates the very process that caused the disruption. What we can say is this: the biological mechanism is real. The structural brain changes are measurable. And sleep fragmentation is one of the most modifiable risk factors we have. That last part matters enormously. It means this is not a sentence. It is something we can work with. But identifying the risk is only half the picture. The other half is understanding what is actually driving the fragmentation. And once you see the mechanism, you will not be able to unsee it. Here is something I find most people have never been told. Not because it is complicated, but because it is rarely connected to sleep in the way it should be. Let me show you what a healthy cortisol curve looks like, because most people have never seen it explained this way. Under normal conditions, cortisol follows a precise rhythm across a 24-hour cycle. It reaches its lowest point around midnight. Then, slowly and gradually, it begins to rise. By the time you wake up in the morning, naturally on your own, cortisol peaks sharply within the first 30 to 45 minutes. That peak is actually healthy. It is what gives you the energy to get out of bed, to feel alert, to start the day. Then it declines steadily through the afternoon and evening, dropping back down as darkness falls and melatonin begins to rise. That is the system working correctly. Cortisol high in the morning, low at night. A smooth, predictable rhythm that your brain has been relying on your entire life. Now here is what goes wrong. Chronic stress, irregular sleep schedules, evening light from screens, and late meals can all flatten that curve. When this happens, cortisol does not drop cleanly in the evening. It stays elevated when it should be falling. And because it is still running high when melatonin is trying to rise, it suppresses melatonin. The brain receives conflicting signals. One system saying, wind down, the other saying, stay alert. The result is that you fall asleep later than you should, and your sleep is shallower from the start. But here is where the 3 a.m. awakening comes in specifically. When the cortisol curve is dysregulated, when that clean daily rhythm has been disrupted, the natural gradual rise that begins around 2 to 3 a.m. becomes something more aggressive. Instead of a slow, quiet climb that your sleeping brain never notices, it becomes a surge, and that surge can pull you fully awake. Heart slightly faster, mind suddenly active, a vague sense of alertness or even anxiety with no clear reason for it. That is not stress waking you up in the way we normally use that word. That is a dysregulated hormonal clock firing at the wrong intensity, at the wrong time, in a nervous system that is already under strain. Now, there is a second piece of this that most people never connect to their nights. Blood sugar. Your brain does not have a fuel reserve. It depends on a steady stream of glucose from the blood to keep functioning around the clock. During sleep, your liver releases stored glucose gradually to maintain that supply. But if blood sugar dropped sharply in the first hours of sleep, often because of a late evening meal high in refined carbohydrates or sugar, the brain perceives a fuel shortage. And when the brain senses a fuel shortage, it triggers an emergency response. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system to push more glucose into circulation. That response is fast, effective, and it pulls you fully awake, often with a racing heart or a vague, sourceless sense of dread. This happens even in people with perfectly normal glucose levels. It is not a diabetes story, it is an evening eating pattern story, and it compounds the cortisol problem already in motion. So what you are dealing with at 3 a.m. is often two systems failing at once. A cortisol rhythm that has lost its smooth arc, and a blood sugar signal firing an unnecessary alarm, each one amplifying the other in a cycle that grows harder to break the longer it runs. Both of these systems run on the same underlying biology, which means they respond to the same targeted interventions. And those interventions are more direct than anything you have likely tried before. I want to be clear about something before we go further. What I am about to share with you is not a supplement list. It is not a collection of wellness tips I found on a website. These are biological levers, 3 specific interventions that work directly with systems your brain already has. Systems that, when supported correctly, can restore the rhythm that fragmented sleep has quietly stolen. Think of this as a nightly protocol, something you do consistently, not occasionally. The first lever is stabilizing your nocturnal blood sugar signal. I explained earlier that a blood sugar crash in the early hours of the night can trigger an emergency cortisol response that pulls you awake. So the goal here is simple. Give your brain a steady fuel supply through the night so that alarm never fires. The most effective way to do this is to stop eating at least 3 hours before bed. When your last meal is still being digested as you try to sleep, your insulin is active, your liver is working, and the conditions are set for a sharp drop in blood sugar several hours later. Finishing dinner earlier gives your body time to stabilize before sleep begins. If you find you are genuinely hungry close to bedtime, a small amount of protein and fat, not sugar, not crackers alone, can help keep blood sugar steady through the night without triggering another insulin spike. Think a small handful of nuts or a boiled egg. Something that digests slowly and keeps the fuel line open without flooding it. That is the foundation. Without it, the other 2 levers are working uphill. The second lever is supporting what I think of as the brain's brake pedal. There is a neurotransmitter called GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, and its job is to slow the nervous system down. When GABA is working well, it tells your brain, "We are done for the day, power down." When GABA function is compromised, the brain stays in a low-level state of readiness, unable to fully let go into deep sleep. Two compounds support GABAergic activity in ways that are well supported by research. The first is magnesium glycinate. Magnesium is a cofactor in GABA receptor function, meaning the brain needs it to use GABA effectively. Deficiency in magnesium is extremely common, particularly in older adults, and it tends to worsen with age as absorption declines. When you do not have enough magnesium, the brake pedal becomes harder to press. The glycinate form is preferable because it crosses into the central nervous system more effectively than other forms. The second compound is L-theanine, an amino acid found naturally in green tea. Research shows it promotes alpha wave activity in the brain, the same calm, relaxed mental state you experience in the moments just before sleep. It also blunts the cortisol response to stress, and studies have found measurable cortisol reduction within 1 to 3 hours of a single dose. Taken together, magnesium glycinate and L-theanine give the nervous system what it needs to actually release tension rather than simply lie still with it. The third lever is anchoring your circadian rhythm at both ends of the day. Your cortisol curve does not reset itself randomly. It anchors to light, specifically to the first light signal your eyes receive in the morning and the last one before bed. Morning sunlight, ideally within 30 minutes of waking, even on a cloudy day, is the single most powerful signal your brain receives to set the cortisol awakening response at the correct time. It tells the entire system, this is when morning begins. Everything else, including the gradual nighttime rise, calibrates from that anchor point. In the evening, the opposite applies. Bright light, especially blue spectrum light from screens, tells your brain it is still daytime. Cortisol stays elevated. Melatonin is suppressed. The curve flattens. Dimming your environment and stepping away from screens at least 60 minutes before bed allows that natural hormonal handoff to happen on schedule. And finally, your wake time matters more than your bedtime. The cortisol awakening response anchors to when you habitually get up. Varying that time by even an hour or two across the week is enough to destabilize the entire rhythm. Consistency at waking is the foundation everything else builds on. So let's say you implement everything I just described: the earlier dinner, the magnesium and L-theanine, the morning light, the consistent wake time, and one night at 3 a.m. your eyes still open. What do you do in the next 10 minutes matters more than almost anything else. Because here is what I see happen most often, and it is the part that turns a simple awakening into a true sleep problem. The moment a person wakes in the early hours, a thought arrives almost immediately. Something like, "Here we go again. I am never going to get back to sleep." And the moment that thought lands, cortisol rises further. The worry about not sleeping becomes the very reason sleep will not return. It is a loop, and it feeds itself fast. The first thing I want you to understand is what is actually happening in your brain at 3 a.m. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for perspective, rational judgment, and calm reasoning, is significantly less active during these hours. The emotional brain is running the show. This means that any thought you have at 3 a.m. will feel heavier, more urgent, more threatening than the same thought would feel at noon. It is biology amplifying the signal, not reality confirming the danger. When you know that, you can meet the moment differently. If you are awake and your mind is starting to spin, try this. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale slowly for 8 counts. That long exhale is not just calming. It physically activates the vagus nerve and shifts your nervous system from its activated, alert state toward its resting, restorative state. Cortisol begins to drop within minutes. Your heart rate slows. The racing quality of your thoughts softens. If you are still awake after 20 minutes, get out of bed. I know that feels counterintuitive, but lying awake in bed trains your brain to associate that space with wakefulness rather than sleep. Go to another room. Sit quietly in dim light. Do nothing stimulating. When sleep pressure returns, and it will, go back. And when the thoughts come, as they almost always do at that hour, I want you to have one sentence ready. Just this. My brain is cleaning itself. This is temporary. I will sleep again. That is not wishful thinking. That is neuroscience. Every minute of sleep your brain returns to is another minute of glymphatic clearance. The system is waiting to resume its work. Your only job is to stop fighting it. Now, I want to tell you something that most people who improve their sleep never think to ask. Because everything we have covered, the cortisol rhythm, the glymphatic system, the blood sugar signal, all of it assumes your brain has the raw materials it needs to actually run these processes. And for a significant number of people, it does not. Not because of anything they are doing wrong, because of a deficiency that is extremely common after 60, rarely tested for, and quietly working against everything else. There is one nutrient that sits at the center of almost every mechanism we talked about today. It is involved in how your neurons fire, how your myelin holds together, how your brain clears waste, and how your cortisol rhythm regulates itself. It is not exotic. It is not expensive. But research consistently shows that a significant portion of adults over 60 are not getting enough of it, and the deficiency often goes completely undetected in standard blood work. I have seen patients do everything right with their sleep and still feel like something is working against them. In many of those cases, this was the missing piece. The next video on your screen right now goes directly into that. What this nutrient is, why the deficiency is so common as we age, and what the research actually shows about its role in protecting the brain over time. If you have been thinking seriously about your cognitive health, and I suspect you have, or you would not still be here, then that video is not optional. It is the next logical step in the same process you started today. What you have learned here is worth protecting. Go watch it now.